Welcome back, everyone. So today we're going to be discussing worldviews, and I have a friend of mine with me, Scott Miller. So would you introduce yourself, Scott?
Yes, my name is Scott Miller. I work for the Domestic Abuse Intervention Programs here in Duluth, Minnesota.
All right. So Scott, I'd like to talk with you about worldviews and why they're so difficult to really describe and understand. So you want to have any comments about that to start with?
Well, I think that, what I was thinking is that maybe we should define what worldviews are, define what values are, beliefs, so that people understand as we're talking here how they work, how they might work together, what they mean, that kind of thing. So what's a worldview?
Okay, so from my perspective, my worldview is that we do have values, we do have beliefs, and many times in my audiences, it's very difficult for them to name them because they just kind of swim in them, but they live them out really quickly and really actively. So I've always thought that the worldview was kind of a combination of all of the values and beliefs that we have, and that causes a filter over it. And so that worldview becomes kind of a way in which we see our legitimate behavior in it, or what is legitimate behavior in it, and then what isn't.
So is a worldview you can just, is it something concrete you can just name, or is it fluid? Is it, how does that worldview operate as a lens for us?
Well, that's why I'm talking to you about it, to see if we can come up with that. But it seems like it's the belief systems that we have and the values that we have, and those combination of values and beliefs create a way in which we understand the world.
So for example, you could have let's say a set of 10 beliefs about yourself and in the world, and depending upon how consistent or inconsistent they are, might be how consistent or inconsistent your worldview is. Is that right?
I think that's right on point. I think the way in which the worldview becomes so important for us is that it gives us the way to understand ourselves. And when we see someone describing the world as someplace I can cheat, someplace I can use violence, and then the next minute they want to have forgiveness and they want to have kindness. So that isn't a consistent worldview. You really have conflicting values and beliefs. And I believe that produces a rather untrustworthy individual in terms of how I can interact with you.
So why don't we do this? Let's talk a little bit about the things that construct this worldview, a value and a belief. So let's start with values. How do you think about a value and how it operates within us?
Okay, a value for me would be that I have to be honest all the time. And another value would be that I value my family. So I can be honest and I can value my family and be consistent. And so that kind of marriage of those values and those beliefs creates a worldview where you would probably see me as a good father, a good citizen, and someone that you could trust in interacting with me. Okay,
so then are the beliefs something that support your value system? So like, for example, if you had a value of being honest and you had a value of being good to your family, what would be some specific beliefs that you'd have to hold to create that value?
Well, I would have to hold that being with my family is more important than getting drunk or getting high.
Okay.
Being with my family is more important than working overtime so much that my family doesn't get to see me. But at the same time, what happens to many of us is that we want to have as much money as we can have for our family, so we spend a lot of time at work and try to justify our time at work and say that I really love my family because that's why I'm working. And so when you see that kind of inconsistency where money becomes more important than the family because another $100, where do you draw the line? It's a slippery slope between having those inconsistent values and beliefs.
So now this is kind of interesting because now what I'm thinking about is that using this particular kind of example, you have this set of values about family and these set of beliefs about making as much money as you can for your family. Now it bubbles up into this worldview. So sometimes I might, if I'm in church and I'm talking about family, I'm going to be talking about it one way, and then if I go and I look at my bank account and I look about our goals, that we might have, our financial goals, now all of a sudden my worldview changes and I talk about prioritizing my time differently. Is that kind of what you're talking about when you, with this worldview that just kind of ebbs and flows with the beliefs that you have?
Sure. So when you're in church talking about the family, and then you look at your bank account and it doesn't have enough money to reach the family goals, you may even add another belief, and that is, I think it'd be okay for me to cheat to get a little extra money, or to deal drugs, or to embezzle money out of a trust account. So it really gets to be a complicated, fluid situation, like you say. But until we have a certain value system that's consistent and it's absolutely the rudder of our lives, we don't know what port you're going to land in each day.
So if something happens, for example, let's take again your example where the individual decides that, maybe they have a grandmother who has a trust account, and if I just skim a little money off of that to meet some goals, and then they get caught. And obviously, when they're doing it, they felt justified, or they probably wouldn't have done it. It may influence now their worldview, given the consequences that are now coming on them. The world isn't what I thought it was. I have a right to this. I'm going to get it anyway. So why am I in court now dealing with this? We have guys that come to our program who say, this isn't, I'm the victim here. I'm the one who is really being wronged. The system is treating me poorly and not really focusing on what it is they did to get there in the first place. This impact that, the world isn't what I thought it was. And it's really, I'm not who I thought I was. That's kind of the juxtaposition I'm trying to get to.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point, Scott. And I think if I could paraphrase what you're saying, is I think that when we live our lives in what we think is a good way, and the world gives us bad results, we see it externally. When in fact, it's our internal belief systems that's inconsistent that causes the world to be kind, mean, and whatever. So to give you another example is I was in a relationship and I thought my relationship was really important, but then the way in which I thought that relationship should be wasn't the way it was. So I started to think that I had to correct my partner. So now I have the right to correct her because my value is a family, but the family has got to be a certain way. Mm-hmm. So now I stop being a good partner and I start being a mean partner. Or I start dealing drugs. I was in jail for 22 years for manufacturing drugs. How could I do that when I was in the life of a boy for 9 years and then go to jail and say I loved him more than anything in the world? Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting how we have value of honesty, but it's kind of blended over by it's okay to be dishonest. I think the example you gave about the cornfield earlier, mm-hmm. if you want to just share that with us, maybe that'd be a good example.
Well, it just seemed to me that when we were talking earlier that this idea that, if I plant a field of corn and my overwhelming view is that I have corn, but if every fourth stalk is replaced by weeds, I still have, the majority, corn is my value. But it's if when I harvest, I'm not going to get the yield because there's going to be these weeds that just keep cropping up, and it may impact how I think about corn, its value, because it didn't give me what I thought it should. Yet I'm not paying attention to the 25% of that field is weeds, even though 75% of my world is corn, right?
Yep, and you could even conclude that my land won't grow corn.
Right.
Simply because you weren't focused on preparing and protecting the corn.
Right.
I think that's really what it's about, is understanding that the world does produce the results of the actions that we do. And the actions we do are the results of our values and beliefs, and there can be conflicting.
So what's this, so you say, most of us are in this spot. Most of us have conflicting values, beliefs, based on situations that occur before us. How is it that an individual then goes about inventorying this and figuring out, okay, these are my, 75% of my world is in a good spot, but 25% of it is situational. Where I flex to what I cut a corner, I skim, I do whatever I need to do to get by. How do I start inventorying that stuff so I can have a more consistent approach to the world and a more consistent understanding of it?
Well, that is the million-dollar question. And so what my process is for doing that is that we want to be able to, first of all, come to the awareness that all of the beliefs that we have, we caught them. We didn't come into the world with a series of beliefs. And then when we do catch them, we see the results of them paying off at times. So if my dad was a farmer and he planted all of his crops, he got good crops, my mom and dad were really consistent on their values. Work hard, do the right thing, and stay healthy. And they were successful in the way in which they wanted to be because they didn't need a new car, they didn't need all new tractors. They were happy doing what it was that those three characteristics would produce. And I think that is really the most important thing, is to believe that a process will produce the life you want, but you do have to examine to see where your conflicts are in your values and beliefs. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that happens is if you take it right through the PAD process, which is you look at your values, you look at your beliefs, what kind of attitude would that create? What would be my thoughts that day, my actions, my habits, my character, how would people describe me? And then what would be the destiny? And you literally can see the results of behavior. So we have to be courageous and brave enough to examine and admit to some beliefs we have. So one of the beliefs that I had a hard time accepting is that it was okay for me, or I didn't really break the law, I was just manufacturing a product for society. And when in fact I was sabotaging my community. And it was hard for me to believe that, but when I see its destiny and I test it, I think that's the only way that we can really come to a realization of our conflicting core values and beliefs.
Okay, so you talk about this courage that you need to have, and we witness that in the classes that you and I do with men who are convicted of battering their partners.
Yep.
That it takes that real courage to face oneself and what one thinks about themselves and what they get to do in a relationship with their family. What's in your process of coming to that conclusion? Because when I listen to it and I think, okay, so how could you ever think that producing cocaine was doing something for society, right? But you had to think something to make it okay. And now you have that, you hold that, and then you move to this place of, that I was fooling myself. This is really not taking me where I want to go in life as a man. So just talk a little bit about that journey. How do you pull the courage? What did it take for you to get there?
Okay, when I started thinking about manufacturing drugs, I was even thinking, okay, if I am successful at manufacturing all these drugs, I will give a huge amount to the Red Cross or to United Way. That would legitimize it. Okay. And then I would just do all kinds of good things in the community, and Jed would get an education, and we'd have a nice home. So I got to that point where it was okay to do that. So how do I get to the point where I come back and I say, okay, this value isn't working? When you're locked behind a wall that's locked with gun towers, they're not keeping people out, but keeping us in. Mm-hmm. And then they lock every building on the compound. Then they lock every section of every building. And then they lock you into one of those rooms with a 40-watt light bulb and a bed that folds down off of the wall, and there's no more room to walk. When they lock you into a room like that, you think to yourself, okay, my community does not trust the way my brain works. And the way my brain works is something I probably should look at. And so I had a little extra time in my hands to sit on my bunk and just wonder, how did I end up in prison for 22 years? And when I realized that my value of being a sneak, hiding, cheating, sabotaging my community, but I'd give $1 million to United Way so that they could take care of my problems, legitimized it all. I thought that's pretty chaotic.
So your worldview at the time was that I'm producing a product that's going to allow me the ability to do great for the world,
Yes.
right? But then you get into this, then you're consequenced, right? You get this fairly heavy consequence that forces you to reevaluate your contribution to the world, because the world doesn't want your contribution. In fact, it wants to take you out of it, right?
Yep.
So, part of the thing that might be here is for folks to start looking at as a way to get to this, to track back to the consequences, the unwanted consequences in their lives for different ways of thinking about themselves and what they get to do. It may not be as significant as actually going to prison, but all of these different things have consequences, and typically we do what you talked about. We make it okay by telling the world they're the ones that don't understand, but I'm the one who does,
Right.
And so I guess part of it is really being honest about, if you've got a consistent consequence that keeps coming and you keep making excuses for it, that people in the world just don't get it, but I'm the one who does. Maybe that's one of the first indicators there's a problem.
Yes, I think it is, and I think it's not only is it significant to look at the consequences, but don't see the consequences as an event. See them as a pattern in your life. When you see them as a pattern in your life, then you can go look for the cause of it. So if you are the first one laid off, you are always having an argument with somebody. You're ending up in jail again. Your diabetes problems are enhancing. Those are consequences that you have to look at in terms of feedback coming at you, because the world is telling you and reflecting what you're doing.
Yeah, I remember a conversation with a man who had been fired from his last 5 jobs for fighting with different coworkers, and his explanation on the front end is that he just happened to get jobs in places where there were people who fight. But and really that was his worldview, that there's a lot of people in the world you can't trust. There's a lot of people in the world who are going to fight, and I just have to defend myself. And when we did this thing that you just talked about, where there's this pattern, of looking at, the
Yep.
consequence, he realized that the only consistent thing in all of those different jobs was him, right?
Yep.
That he was the one who was fighting everybody at every job that he went to. And that took a real step of courage, because it refocused the lens, if you will, from everyone else to himself.
Yep.
But then from that, he was able to build a great deal differently in changing his beliefs, his values, and then ultimately his worldview.
I had a guy tell me a story about this young boy in his early 20s decided to leave his town and go move to another town. So he was driving through all these towns, and he finally found this one town he liked. And he goes into this restaurant, and he's sitting in the restaurant eating, and there's an elder in the town sitting there, and he goes, "So you're new in town?" He said, "I am." He said, "So what brings you to town?" He says, "Well, I'm looking for a new town to move to." "Oh," he says, "Why are you leaving your old town?" He said, "Well, my old town, everybody is selfish. There's a cliquey. I can't get a job. There's all of the people are just like in groups." And he said, it's just chaos in that town. That's why I'm moving to a new town." And the elder looked at him and said, "Well, young man, I think you'll find this town the same way." And I just wonder if he realized that it was internal and not external.
Right. So we take, you can't move away from your thinking. Your
Yep.
thinking walks with wherever you do.
Yep.
Right? So what it sounds like we're talking about here is that, over the course of our lives, we develop certain beliefs based on certain experiences that we have, or we learn them from people who are older, like maybe a father or a mother, or they teach us things about the world. We hold this thing. I remember men talking about in group how their fathers, if they were abusive fathers, that they really had a reaction against them and said, I don't believe what he does, and I don't I don't agree with virtually everything he says, but you did come to agree with this thing, that if your partner doesn't do what you want her to do, or she's doing something you don't want her to do, that violence is ultimately acceptable to get her to comply. So you may believe, your worldview is that I've disassociated myself from my father's world, yet you find yourself committing the same acts of violence against the partner as you watched your dad do, right? So it's this socially constructed kind of belief system that gets created over time with a myriad of experiences that we've had, and then from that we develop values. I'll respect people who respect me, but I won't respect people just because they are. Right. Because it's something that has to be earned. That's the belief, and then it affects how I think about respecting other people. And then ultimately, this collection of values and beliefs that we end up with at any given point in our lives creates a specific kind of worldview that depending upon where we focus, can change. And so we may think that the world's messed up, but really our view of it is what's inconsistent. And that's where we need to focus.
I think that really sums it up nice too, Scott, because when you live in a world where people betray you, or people don't do what you want, or whatever it might be, and you use violence to get your way, or even sneaky ways and cheating ways, I think that whole summation is that the world just does not produce good things. And just like the cornfield can't produce corn. And being a good parent just doesn't pay, because it just doesn't work. Being a good employee doesn't work until you understand that your contribution to that is what the world's reflecting back to you.
Yeah, that's good.